Hello, everybody, and welcome to I just noticed how it says half of StoryTube next to your name. I'm getting sidetracked already, but welcome to our first Emily Henry book club. I am joined by the lovely Yolanda, half of StoryTube, and I think you're the reason I read Emily Henry because you put out a I Tried Romance for the first time video, and I had never read romance as an adult. I read like YA romance as a kid and then read that series Confessions of a Shopaholic and stuff before it became a movie and never really went back to it. And then you put out a video saying this is quality writing. And I was like, you know what? Eventually I'll give it a go. And then about a week ago, I was like, you know what? Now's the time. And then inhaled her 5 books over the course of like 4 days because they were so good. And I loved them so very much. So I then messaged you and was like, we need to talk about these books, and we decided that the first 2 books we would talk about would be Beach Read and Funny Story. Funny Story being her book that came out this year. So yes, but you've read 4 out of the 5 Emily Henry books, and it seems like some of the titles are possibly different where you live compared to the US, and the covers are different too, which is super strange.
The covers are insanely different. Like I don't like because like there's often changes, right? But they're so different.
Yeah.
And for some reason, this is bizarre to me because they've changed People We Meet on Vacation, right? As the American title.
It's yes.
Oh no,
Or Friends
or
We Meet
Friends.
on Vacation.
Maybe it's that.
I'm pulling it up right now. Hold on. Because I want to be sure. It is People We Meet on Vacation. I don't know why I'm thinking it's Friends We Meet on Vacation.
Okay, so People We Meet on Vacation, and that's obviously the original title. And for the UK and Ireland, and I think Australia as well, they've changed it to You and Me on Vacation, which is so bizarre because like we don't use the word vacation, we'd say holiday. So like I would understand if they change it from vacation to holiday. Even there, I'm like, well, the characters are Americans, so like obviously it's vacation.
Right.
But that would make more sense. I don't know why they had issue
with the name.
With that word. Like
yeah, that's so funny because it's true. They call it like a bank holiday and stuff like that. Like it's always the term holiday, not vacation. So that is really funny to me, but I do enjoy that. So we're going to talk about Beach Read and Funny Story. I don't know if you have a preference of which one you want to talk about first, but I feel like we should maybe just give like a little contextual background for Emily Henry because I feel like she deserves all the praise that everyone should be giving her because she's delightful. So my feeling, and based on the little bit of research that I did, is that she often doesn't even get classified as romance. She gets classified as women's fiction and contemporary romance. And I was like, okay. I thought that was really downgrading like what she offers for literature to just say, first of all, I want to classify and say there's nothing wrong with women's fiction. I am thrilled that women's fiction exists, but I don't classify her as women's fiction. Would you?
No, I wouldn't. I find these classifications are so often sexist.
Yes,
and
they
biased,
are.
like biased in many ways. But like it's so funny to me. I actually hadn't seen that she gets classified as women's fiction. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I've seen this a lot because so I look after I'm a bookseller for anybody who doesn't know, and I look after the fiction section in the bookshop that I work in. And we recently separated out romance as like its own little subsection because we get asked for it so much.
Yeah.
And so I basically like pulled everything that I thought was romance into that section, thinking in terms of what will people think of as romance, right? And one of the things I put there was One Day by David Nichols, or David Nichols in general. And multiple like colleagues like asked me about it and were like, oh, David Nichols and romance? Really? Like, I'm like, well, he literally, like all of his books are about love. Like they're all love stories. They're all like people meet and like fall in love over a certain period of time. And then like that's the definition of romance. But people think like, because it's not a woman writing it, and like it's not the modern romancy cover, and people don't talk about, oh, it's spicy, it's not spicy, like it's not. It doesn't go in romance, you know? And I
Yeah.
like that's also curious to me. And like, and it's funny, like Emily Henry, like if people are pulling her out of romance, like, is it because are you acknowledging that she's a good writer and therefore she doesn't belong in romance because romance is trash? Or are you putting her in
Yes.
women's fiction to
So
degrade her? Like
100%. And this is something that I've been talking about a little bit in terms of romantasy, not just romance in
mm,
general, but the fact
yeah,
that the qualifier of what we deem to be good fantasy can't have sex in it. And the second that a
yeah.
book has sex, it's therefore smut and it's not quality literature. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems like that's kind of how romance is viewed too, which is kind of interesting because the two romance authors that I have now read in the last week have been Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez. And I feel like there are those types of scenes, but they're not really the forefront of the story. Like it's really character driven
Yeah.
stories, and a lot of them are quite raw in terms of the emotion. I will say that the one that you have not yet read, Happy Place, like emotionally scarred me, but in the best possible way. So it was one of those things that I wasn't even really thinking about what those like more salacious scenes would be in the story. It was really getting to know the characters on a more intimate and grounding level. And I feel like that's something that Henry does really beautifully. And it
Yeah.
could very well be that because she's being recognized for her character work, they're like, oh, she doesn't belong in romance because romance is very tropish and pedantic and just kind of basic. And it's
Mm,
really not, I think, anymore. I think we're kind of stuck in that mentality of maybe Fabio being on the cover of a romance novel and thinking, oh, this is what romance is. But I
yeah.
think that contemporary romance really has evolved into this great genre. So I'm really excited about it. Hello, Joanna. I would love
Hey.
for you to read Emily Henry, even though I don't know if you'll like it. But I would love for you to give it a try. I was trying to give her a suggestion the other day as to which of Henry's books I thought that she would probably resonate the most with, and I thought maybe
Mm,
Book Lovers would be a good choice for Joanna.
yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's
Hello, Carlos. But would you
great.
agree? You think Book Lovers maybe would be the right choice for Joanna?
I think that it might be, yeah, yeah. I think I would be, um, I think anybody who enjoys rom-coms as movies. I was actually saying this to Carlos yesterday because I don't think I've ever encountered a person who is like anti rom-com in movies. But like
Yeah,
I'm sure like there's somebody out there who doesn't like them. Now that's fine.
right.
But I feel like even if it's not your favorite, everybody has like at least one rom-com where you're
Yep.
like, I like that one, you know? But
Yes.
then why does that not translate then, hey Rogue,
To a book.
to books? Exactly. And
Yes.
I feel like if you like rom-coms and movies, I don't really see a reason to not have something to enjoy about Emily Henry.
Sure. Yes.
And if you don't enjoy Emily Henry, I'd be pretty confident to say, well, this genre is probably not for you.
Correct.
Um,
I would very much agree with that assessment. There were a couple of moments in some of her books that I cackled, specifically because I'm listening to these in the audiobook format, and I think the banter that she
so
establishes
good.
between her characters is excellent. I will say that in terms of relationship building, I think that she does a very good job at building the relationships between the love interests. But in certain scenarios, I feel like she doesn't do as strong a job with building it maybe between like family members or friends. But it is interesting just to see how she kind of weaves in and out of this in different narratives, because in some of her books the romantic love interests are friends and then they
Yeah.
become a love interest. So it's kind of fun to see how she works in different scenarios. Yes, she switched from
Mhm.
YA magical realism to adult romance in 2020, which is something that's really interesting because I know people that really disliked her YA writing but really love her adult romance novels. So it's something
Interesting.
to keep in mind if you have tried her before. You might like this better.
I'd be curious to try her YA stuff someday, just out of curiosity, but it wouldn't be like super high on my list.
It's not for me either. I'm not gonna lie. When I got to the end of Happy Place, I was like, oh no, like I'm now done with all of her books. Do I want to go to and give the YA ones a try? And I was like, no, not right now.
Yeah, maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe in the future, but not for now. Anything else we feel is important of note to mention about Emily Henry before we get into our book discussions?
In terms of, I mean, we've kind of touched on it, but in terms of like context for us and how we came to Emily Henry, would you say that you had preconceived notions about romance before?
100%. 100%. I was like, it's garbage. And this is so ludicrous because I've been on such a romantasy kick since the beginning of the year where I'm like, oh, I love it. Just give me all the romantasy. It's great. And thinking about romance, I think it was because romantasy still offers that fantastical world.
Yeah.
And you're able to really immerse yourself in that, even if you're not super involved with the romance that's happening in the story. Whereas romance, I was like, it's real life. Like,
yeah,
I don't care. But I feel like Henry makes it so believable. And when you think of rom-coms a lot of the time, I feel like maybe 90s rom-coms did this a little bit better in that even though you knew it was somewhat ridiculous that these situations were happening to people, the situations themselves often felt believable because you're like, oh yeah, I could see something like that happening. Especially because miscommunication is such a common trope in romance because people as a whole miscommunicate with each other. But I feel that that is a strength of Henry's in that it never feels abnormal or too far strong that the situation
100%.
I'm reading about like would never happen. I'm like, no, I know people that this has happened to or this has happened to me. So I definitely resonate so much more with that. And I feel like in terms of preconceived ideas and notions, it was just very much that saccharine, everyone is so happy, sweet, thing, which is just so not me. So that was my approach to it. How about you? What was your approach?
Honestly, very similar. And I had this idea as well that I had never really read romance. And then I think about it, I'm like, that's not actually true. Like, well, not just read, but like, love rom-coms. I love so many rom-coms.
I do too.
And romantic dramas as well. Like, I'm a very dramatic person. And,
same here.
but I had the same kind of idea and like concern as you in terms of in romantasy. Not that I've read a ton of romantasy anyway, but I read a good bit of like YA fantasy with a strong romantic subplot when I was growing up, and like some of it I would still enjoy. Like I really like Cassandra Clare, and like there is, like you said, like that fantasy window dressing still there and plot to latch onto. Plus, I feel like in fantasy you have more of a leeway to create high drama in the romantic relationship because of the setting, to make it dramatic and create like tension. Whereas, like you said, contemporary romance, I was like, it's going to be all miscommunication and people being stupid, and it's going to annoy me. It's going to be dumb or like really far-fetched. And it's a real skill to have people in regular life situations that are complicated and have them behave in a mature way within reason, and yet there's still tension. That's just it's a skill, and she does it really well.
I agree. On that note, would you like to start with beach read or funny story first?
I don't mind. We could start with, well, I've read Funny Story like more recently, so I probably remember the details better, but we can start with beach read. I don't mind.
Sure. Let's start with beach read. All right. Cool. So this will contain spoilers just to kind of give everyone a heads up. But the basic premise for beach read I thought was really fun in that it's two authors that are writers of vastly different genres. One is a romance author, contemporary romance author, while the other is more grim literary fiction, I feel like. And they were college rivals and end up both in the same small town where they end up as neighbors. And they basically create a bargain between the two of them that if they can author a book in the opposing genre and get it sold and published, that they will endorse the other's book. I really loved this book. Like, this was such a fun read.
It's such a great concept. I love that
Yes.
she weaves like love of literature and like writing
Yes.
into it so much. And it was the first one I read of
Oh,
hers.
was
And
it? Okay.
yeah, and I think it worked really well to challenge my notions because January is challenging
Oh,
our
yeah.
notions.
Yes.
And she's like,
100%.
well, embrace the fun of it. And like, no, it's not lesser. And it can mean something and it can be
Yes.
creative and like impactful. And like, maybe you just want some joy in your life. What's wrong with joy? And I was reading it going like,
Exactly.
huh.
That's so fitting. And I completely agree because it's always interesting when you have a very sunny character and a more jaded character, which you definitely have as the dynamic between January and Augustus, aka Gus, in this story.
Mhm.
And what I really love about Henry too is that she doesn't only give a backstory to the female protagonist, but she gives a fully fleshed background to the love interest. And in Beach Read, especially, I felt it was so much more meaningful and impactful because of the fact that Gus has gone through this really traumatic divorce and he's carrying that with him while simultaneously January is trying to grapple with the fact that her father had this affair that she didn't know about until after he's died. And the two of them are both really struggling with intimacy and learning how to accept that part of themselves again and be open to trusting other people. And I thought that she handled this so well. Like, I was so impressed when I read this. I was like, oh, she's not screwing around. Like, she actually gets it, which made me think like maybe she's been divorced or maybe, like she just feels so believable in the sense that you want to think, oh yeah, she's lived this experience because it feels quite visceral when you're reading it.
Yeah, I agree. And that was probably another preconceived notion I had in that like maybe the most like romance characters would be a bit younger.
Yes.
And I really appreciate that Emily Henry writes about like 30-year-olds.
Yes.
Which is just like you have a bit more lived experience. And
Yeah.
there are people that have like there are people that are divorced or like come out of like long-term relationships or are dealing with like their family issues, but in a like a slightly more mature distance kind of way, or like in terms of thinking of starting their own family. And it's just it's refreshing, probably because we're that age, but like but yeah, I think she handled that really well and it gave it more emotional depth because they just have more going on. So like there's like angst in there, but it's handled differently and it's coming from a place where you're like, yeah, I get it. Like I understand why you have trust issues and I understand why you're insecure or you think that somebody's gonna like disappear on you or whatever, because like who wouldn't in that situation?
Yes, exactly. I completely agree. And it's so true because I'm very open about my age. Like I tell people all the time, I'm like, oh yeah, I just turned 34. And I remember when my friends started going, like that first wave of divorces started happening, and a lot of like it's an interesting time, right? Because we're no longer of that generation where people like I have friends that got married quite young. Like I had some friends that got married at 21, 23, like that kind of thing. But the majority of my friends waited to get married. And then it was interesting when that first group like started getting divorced. And it was the group that had met each other when they were in college and like that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, this is the age that I'm at now, that like my friends are getting divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read Beach Read, I was like, this is very believable. Like he's of that age group where he's kind of going through that first wave of where you feel you've met your person, like you met them at the right time, like of what society classifies at the right time of your life to really meet somebody, settle down, and start a family. And the wool kind of gets pulled over your eyes and the rug is torn out from underneath you, and you go, oh no, now I'm divorced, and none of those things have happened, except now I'm a pit of despair and I'm empty inside. That's how Gus felt to me. And
Yeah.
I simultaneously loved it because I saw what my friends went through, and I can't speak to being divorced, as I myself am not divorced, but it just felt like, I feel like it's almost different. I don't know if there's ever like a better time to be divorced, but I feel like there's a higher stigma on like if you're young and you're getting divorced, because people look at your life choices really being a mistake. Like, oh, you rushed
Yeah.
into it, you didn't take your time. Whereas if it's an older couple and like their child has moved out and gone to college and stuff, it's like, oh no, we drifted apart. And people look at that and go, oh, that's sad, but you had a good run.
Yeah.
Whereas in a situation like Gus, it's like, oh no, it just failed. And I felt like that was really something that he carried with him for so much of the book. Like I felt so frustrated on his behalf and so saddened that he would have tolerated his ex's behavior to try to work on their marriage. I was like, no.
Yeah.
I remember at one point, like I actually said no out loud. I was like, no, no, no. Because I was so angry on his behalf, just because I had seen my friends go through similar situations. And I was like, I never want someone to not feel and know their worth, especially by a significant other. And I felt that Henry just did that so, so well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also angry on his behalf, and I think something else that she did so well, because she gives such a fleshed out backstory to everybody, like, well, both people in
Yeah.
the relationship, that now correct me if I'm wrong on the details, because it's been a while,
Mm-hmm.
but he had issues with his mother, right? Like his mother growing up like abandoned him or something like
Yeah.
that, right? Wasn't it? So like we get all his backstory of how he was raised, and then on top of that, the failed marriage, but also you understand why he behaved the way he did and wanted to like latch on to
Preserve.
her.
Exactly.
Exactly, yeah. And why that would be doubly devastating, because doesn't he say something like that at some point where he's like, I just, there was nothing I could do
Yeah.
um to make them stay. And like, and that was so heartbreaking, because you really feel the weight of, this is not just
Yeah.
a couple of years of a relationship, this is 30 years of your life feeling
Yes.
that way. And I just completely underestimated Emily Henry and the genre
Yeah.
of being able to do something like that. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
I feel so strongly about this now. Like, I'm sure, by the way, that there's plenty of trash in romance, and maybe we'll
Yeah.
read some of it and like it'll be fun to talk about.
Yep.
But like, isn't one of the major like components of humanity and human life to fall in love,
Yeah.
and to connect with other people, like on in any way,
Mm-hmm.
like get to know other people, and like get to know ways to work with each other,
Yes.
um based on everybody's like lived experience and history. And she does that so well. Like, of course, the window dressing and like how it's presented is very like fluffy and like, let's
Right.
feel good romance and stuff, but like what's underneath is very real.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that she does this very well in all of the books for all of the
Mhm.
main couples, in that there is something rooted from childhood that kind of carries through with them. And Yeah, I felt like between the two of them in this story, Gus is really more that person,
Yeah.
because January is dealing more so with the recent knowledge of what her father was doing. And something even still that I thought was so well done is that I felt such empathy for the woman who had the affair with her father. Um, because to her, he was the love of her life, and it was a devastating loss for her. She was going through her own struggles, and when they begun a romantic relationship, like, he was separated. So it was, understandable that he might be seeing other people and that his wife would be seeing other people. And I was so heartbroken on behalf of this woman, to basically then carry around the stigma for the rest of her life of like being the other woman, when in reality she rekindled a romance with her first love. Like, it was very devastating, and it felt
Yeah.
very relatable. Like, how many times, I mean, I know several people that have gone to a high school reunion or a reunion in general, and they've ended up hooking up with someone that they knew when they were much younger and then had a relationship with them. Like, you have a pull a lot of the time to your past. And I just felt like that was so prominent and prevalent for that character. And it was really just so sad. And yeah, with Gus, like, not knowing his own value and worth because of the relationship that he had with his parents, and then his subsequent relationship with his aunts, because they kept trying to basically adopt him and save him, which was very loving, but like, you still understood why he felt the way that he did. And
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved it so much.
I wanted to hug him so
Yes.
badly.
Yes.
I was just like, somebody give this man a hug right now.
I completely agree. I felt that a few times, but also I don't want to like play it up like this book is just entirely sad, because it's really not. There were so
No.
many good moments about this book, and Gus's story about the cult that he was writing was such an interesting secondary story within the story. I
I
loved it
want to
so
read
much.
that.
I know. Like, I totally would read this. And I loved how she showed how authors can do research for books and how they can learn how to write about subjects, certain, instances, groups of people's appropriate reactions. Like, it felt very much like you were entering an author's process, which I thought was
Mhm.
so fascinating, just because, like, I write, but I've never done anything like what Gus does, where it's like you
Yeah.
actively go out and you interview people and you try to garner how someone would genuinely react in that type of situation. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah. I thought it was really cool. Like, apart from just being a really fun concept, and it was so funny. Like, you just put them in situations
Yes.
that they wouldn't be in usually, because they wouldn't do
Mhm.
that kind of thing, but in a really organic way. Like, it
Yes.
made sense. Like, I believe that two writers with writer's block would do that, because when you have writer's block, it's the most frustrating thing in the world. And like,
Yes.
I can't imagine, um like, I mean, I get writer's block, but I am not a published writer. I don't make my money off of it, so like, it's just me that's being frustrated. But if on top of that you have like, well, my bills, and like,
Mhm.
this is my career, I absolutely believe that they'd be like, yes, take me to talk to this survivor from a cult, because maybe that will do something to like ground
Right?
my brain.
Exactly. Like, and this was something too that it felt believable that, even though she's been a successful author, like, she's strapped for cash,
Yeah.
and it felt very believable of a millennial to be in a situation
Yeah.
where they can't afford a house. I was like, yes.
Thank you.
Like, you're nailing this, Emily Henry. You are absolutely nailing this. So I really just appreciated the honesty, especially also between her and Gus, where she's straight up like, I can't afford this. Because she legitimately can't. So I really loved smaller things like that too. It just felt like they were completely rounded out and fleshed out people. and their chemistry was excellent. Emily
Yeah.
Henry does such good chemistry, like so good. I loved it.
Yeah, so believable, because my
Yes.
main thing, like I haven't tried that much romance, but I've sampled a couple of other authors apart from Emily Henry, and there's been some that I've enjoyed, but I don't think, like, nobody has made me believe so truly, yeah, these two people are into each other, and
Yeah.
I know why they're into each other, and I know why they're falling for each other. It completely makes sense,
Yeah.
because like it's sexual tension but also banter, but then also balancing it really well with like real conversations and
Yes.
getting to know each other and like challenging each other. It's so good. So
Yeah.
good.
So what's interesting too, right, is in this story, Gus and January already know each other, but they weren't
Yeah.
friends. So it's really fascinating in the sense of like you have this preconceived idea of who this person was, and it's pulling it back a layer at a time and going, oh, I didn't realize that you're not like this, even though I've thought of you this way for the last 15 years. So I really appreciated that just because it really tackles that idea that we can create a whole image and person in our mind and ascribe it to someone and go, that's who you are. And I don't need to know anything else about you. And January is completely wrong on
Mhm.
basically everything she has preconceived about Gus. And
Yeah.
he was very accurate in his assumption of her, which was something that I also thought was really fascinating because he is the more he's the darker character, right? Like
Mhm.
he's more based in realism than January is. January was kind of like floating through life at that point. Not that she hadn't had hardship, because she had with her mom's illnesses and stuff, but he sees that she's talented and embraces the fact that like she's talented and really wants to engage with her, and she views that as he's a dick and all he's doing is critiquing my work. And like I loved that that was the immediate reaction, because I would 1000% be January, like 1000%. I was like, girl, relatable.
Yeah. I love that as well. So like I did a master's in creative writing, and it reminded me a lot of that. Like that's what I was picturing the entire time of like,
Yes.
and when I did it, it was like there was certainly no Gus there. Like nobody was really harsh at all, but like nobody
Okay.
was like criticizing. Like I feel like
Yeah.
there wasn't the, maybe it was because of like pandemic and stuff, and like we had to do it online, and it's just not the same.
Yeah.
But people were extremely hesitant to say anything negative about
Negative? Yeah.
anybody, and then you don't learn anything, right? So like I would understand like Gus's frustration of like I just like I want things to be better.
Yes.
But if somebody had like decided to start like saying stuff about my writing and only mine, I would 100% feel
Oh,
targeted
yeah.
and just be
I'd
like,
be
why are you
so
picking on
mad.
me?
Exactly. So mad. And so my master's is not in creative writing, but I had a seminar. My supervisor was the worst. And I had a seminar where we had to do, he did this with all of our papers. I don't know why I'm trying to be very specific. With every single paper that you wrote for his class, everyone in the class had to read it and then tear it apart in front of you. That was, and like the basic was that if you can defend your thesis to a group of angry people, then your argument is probably correct. And it not only went after the material itself, but it went after your writing. And his thought was, well, this will make you a better writer. I was like, this makes terrible people into more terrible people. Like, what are you doing? And I had several Gus's in my class, like several. And I'm not going to
Oh,
lie, I was also one of them, because I was like, I'm not going to waste my time if I feel like this person has really great potential. Like, I want to help them get there, but simultaneously, I want you to help me get there as well. But I would be so livid if it had just been one person over
mm-hmm.
and over and over. And you're looking at them and going, because you can't say anything, like you just can't say anything. So I felt like that was so relatable. And I was just, oh man, I felt for her and just like felt like I was in my seminar again and was just like, nope, I don't like it. I don't like it. But I was like, but she's making me feel things. And I do like this. Good job, Emily Henry.
Yeah, that sounds horrendous.
It
Like,
was. Yeah, it was real bad. He also did this other one. This is so off topic, but like somewhat tangential, where we were paired into like you weren't paired, but you were matched with someone, and you both had to read the same book, and you had to do a comprehensive book review that was styled in like a very specific way for academia and classical history specifically. And I remember I came in and I was new to this school. It's a really well-regarded school, but I didn't do my undergrad there. I just did my graduate degree there. And the seminar doubled as an honors undergrad seminar and a regular graduate seminar. And I was paired with an undergrad student who was in her final year there. She came in with like 24 written pages for the book review, and I had 10. And I was like, well, this is going to be horrendous. Like, have I grossly underestimated what I was supposed to do here? And my teacher tore into her, like actively tore into her. He's like, why on earth would you write something this long that's supposed to be a book review? I was like, oh my God, stop being so mean. Like, he was so mean. So it was just, and like, everyone in the class had to read both our book reviews and then have them side by side and comparing. I was like, this is the worst moment of my life. Please make this stop. So, yes, I related very much to January while reading this section of the book. And I absolutely hated it, but simultaneously loved it because I was like, this is academia in a nutshell. So, yes. But it just, again, real life situations that Emily Henry is kind of thrusting you into. And I was like, yeah, this stuff happens all the time. But there might not be the sexual tension that's motivating behind it. Just there might not be that.
just people being people.
Exactly.
I think the whole book is kind of about challenging expectations, right? Like it's your assumptions about other people, like January's assumptions about Gus, but also their assumptions about like their writing, right? Like she is so angry at him being a snob. Like she perceives him to be a snob about her writing, and she is doing the same thing to him.
Oh,
where she
100%. She's way worse.
Some of the things that she says are so funny. Like I can't remember any lines, but she's like, does she compare him to Hemingway at some point? And like, are you gonna go? And
he does compare him to Hemingway, and he says that he is not a Hemingway, but then like goes and gives out some other like pretentious author, which was so funny. But the thing that I really loved is that she refused to read his books, but he read all of hers because he knew in college that she was very talented. And I love a dark, broody character that knows that they're dark and broody, that also then appreciates the light that other characters have. And that's something that he reinforces with January, that he appreciates that about her, that she can not only maybe look at levity in a situation, but she's just joyful in her everyday life. And it's a good quality to believe that people can have a happy ending together. And it's something that he's kind of lost sight of. So I love the idea of what you're talking about in terms of expectation, because I feel like January has, oh yes, Evie, I am so excited for you. It's my favorite. It's so good. But let's see what Evie says here before I finish my thought. Don't tell my boss that I'm not working. I read Beach Read and loved it until the epilogue when I realized it was tacked on. I don't.
Oh, what?
Interesting.
Hold on.
I'm curious now if Yolanda has the epilogue. And what didn't you love about the epilogue, Evie? My last chapter is 9 months later. So I
Same.
assume that's the epilogue. I don't know.
Yeah,
um,
I have 9 months later as well. I actually
okay.
don't remember how that goes.
Yeah, that's the epilogue. She's saying you didn't love the epilogue, Evie. I really liked it, but that's just me. Tell me why you didn't like it, Evie. But in terms of expectations, it made it to happily ever after. Well, I thought that they were gonna get their happily ever after because it's a romance novel. But I will say I do think that she kind of handles the happily ever after a little bit better in some of the other books.
Yeah.
Yeah, spoiler when he
Oh,
proposed to her.
yeah.
Fair enough.
I think, like, I do think there's some bits towards the end of Beach Read, even just where she runs out in the rain, and like that was like it was layered on a tiny bit too thick for me, where I
Yeah.
was like, okay, this is getting a bit cheesy. I was
Yes.
still enjoying it because I was very invested at this point, obviously.
Yeah.
But I get what we were coming from, Evie, in terms of like it did get a little bit like over the top, and I think the other ones balanced that better.
I do that. I do agree with that. In terms of expectation though, and January's expectations, like that also really strongly applies to her father. She had
Yes.
expectations of her father that were so inherently broken and of her mother. Like, I think this is the general theme for January is that she has really high expectations of everyone around her. And it's not necessarily even high expectations, she just has expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And if people don't meet them, she doesn't quite know how to grapple with that. And obviously, she feels very betrayed by her father and then by extension her mom, and she has this expectation of Gus. She has an expectation of herself because she's been able to write books in shorter periods of time than she has at this point, and she keeps harping that about herself. She's like, I've done it faster than I've done it before, like, you know, I should be able to do this. And she really does struggle with that. And it's really interesting because Gus will say to her, he's like, you know, it takes me a lot longer to write a book than it does for you because this is my process, you know, like there's different ways to go about things. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that he really is a good foil for her and that he teaches her to adjust expectations. Um, so I thought that that was really interesting, just the concept of expectations in this novel.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like her expectations of herself as well. I think I could really relate to that.
Yeah.
To just being very mean to yourself, and then thinking like, oh, if I would never talk to another person that way, right? The way you talk to yourself.
I know. It's so horrible. And like they often oh, thank you, Evie. It's now that I have a daughter myself, I've always reminded, I'm like, I would never say that to her. So why would I say that to myself? And it used to
Hmm.
be like, would you say that to your younger self, like the child you? And you're like, well, no. And you're like, well, why do you allow it to happen now? Type thing. And we really are our own hardest critics a lot of the time. And I feel like
Yeah.
January really encapsulates that in this book. But I feel like also Gus does
Hmm.
because it seems like he almost feels like that there's something inherently unlovable about him, and that's why people keep abandoning him. Um, and it was really just it was so well done to see how they really come together and they learn to trust with each other. I really really loved it. I love
Yeah.
Gus.
I love Gus too. I think he's my second favorite love interest overall of the four that
Oh.
I've read. We can get there at some point when we talk about other books, but I think what I really loved about January's relationship with her father and how she has to come to terms with that is that, and this is going to be sound bad, the fact that her father is dead. I didn't love that her father was dead, but it's the
Yeah.
fact that she she gets all this new information that completely recontextualizes
Yes,
who
their
he was as
relationship.
a person and their relationship, but she doesn't get to confront him about it.
Yeah.
She has to deal. This is something that she has to deal with, and I think ultimately that's what you have to do, right? Like when you're an adult and you can't force
Yeah.
other people to see things the way you see them, to
Yeah.
agree with you, to even sometimes have a conversation with you. Like, you can't force other people into that.
Yeah.
You are the one that needs to deal with whatever you're struggling with. And this is just like a heightened version of that, where
Yeah.
you literally can't. Like, he is not
Yeah. Yep.
there. And I thought that that made that took away the possibility of a wrapping it all in a bow, everything is perfect ending,
Yes.
where like her father comes back and is like, I'm so sorry, or whatever. And sure, we get like the letter, which like whatever, but like at the end of the day, she has to move on and like
Yeah.
deal with this um earth shattering
Yes.
revelation by herself. And he doesn't get to apologize, he doesn't get to tell her her side of the story, his
Yeah.
side of the story, she doesn't get to scream at him or like anything.
Yeah.
Which makes it all the more heartbreaking, but also just more real again, because
Yeah.
like, right.
100%. And like this again, super relatable for me. Um, Not with my father, but with my grandmother. I had a very wonderful relationship with my grandmother literally until she died. And after she died, found out some really sus stuff and was like, this is terrible because now I can never confront you about it and get
Mm,
your side of the story. Like I was not in a January situation where like I got letters trying to explain behaviors and anything like that. It was just final. And I was
yeah.
like, I know what that feeling feels like where you are desperately seeking answers because this person you love, you feel has betrayed you on this very primal and, raw way. And it's just heart-wrenching. So again, like Emily Henry just hitting me in all these stupid feels.
Yeah.
Oh my God. This whole book was just amazing from start to finish. I agree that it did have a few moments that I was like, bit cheesy, especially with the rain outside at the end. Um, but I loved it. I really, really
Yeah.
did love this book.
It's great, and like very, very minor. We've talked about a lot of really heavy stuff.
Mhm.
Minor things as well. I think another thing that she does really well is pepper in pop culture references, but just the
Yes.
right amount. Never too much where you're like, okay, it's becoming a gimmick,
Yeah.
but enough that like, yeah, this is how people talk. People talk and references a lot of the time, or like
Yeah.
they mention something that they like. And like when they were like holding up pieces of paper, the first to like communicate, the first thing I thought was, this is like the You Belong
Taylor
With Me
Swift.
music video. And
Yeah.
then they reference it themselves, and I was
Yeah.
like, yeah.
You get me. Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things too I really love about her because the fact it's contemporary. It's not like, even though a lot of the time she places people in fictional cities and towns in our world, the outside stuff is still very real and present. So
Yeah,
yeah, like referencing that Taylor Swift is a thing or Hemingway, and
yeah,
stuff like that. It's like, yeah, these are real things. And I love that she pulls that in because we do share that stuff with people that we love.
yeah,
We want to show them the things that we like and have them like it too. So I agree. I love that she peppers that stuff in there. It's great.
yeah. It's just fun. And then when you recognize, you're like, oh, like he references Jack Reacher at some point. I said it to Carlos and I was like, there's a Reacher reference, by the way. This one's for you.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. It's sometimes really niche stuff too. And you're like,
Yeah,
oh, I see what you did there.
yeah.
Okay. Do we have any final thoughts on Beach Read before we jump into funny story?
I think we can go ahead and go into funny
Okay.
story. Actually, I'll just show my cover properly, because I think the thumbnail one is the US
Yes,
one.
it is
And
very
the
different. Yeah, apparently you can't
yeah.
have a woman in a bikini on the cover in Ireland.
I mean,
Who knows? Who knows? So, funny story is my first Emily Henry read. And so I do need to confirm. What are we confirming, Evie? Is it the covers? Because yes. So Funny Story was my first Emily Henry book, and it was because I've seen it popping up everywhere. I've gone to the bookstore. Yolanda, is yours 9 months later, the proposal, or the reading to each other?
I am not sure.
So I don't remember him proposing, but I'm looking right now. Oh no, wait. Did he propose here? Let me see.
It's them dedicating their books to each other.
Yeah, that's what I see. That's what mine had too, Evie. Mine doesn't have a proposal. Mine just has them dedicating the books.
And then the last line is, it was just another good day, a perfect day, a happy for now, so vast and deep that I knew, or rather believed, I didn't have to worry about tomorrow.
Yep, that's my last line as well. So I'm curious, but I have the ebook. I don't have the. She got the defunct edition. That's
now
funny.
I remember that dedicating the book was really cute and very fitting for the theme.
Yeah, I thought it was a good final moment for the book. But okay, so funny story I kept seeing popping up because I've gone to my local bookstore a few times over the last month and a half and kept seeing this, and I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure this is the girl that Yolanda read and really liked. And I love when people say, oh, funny story. So I was like, I like that title, and figured this will be the one that I start with because it's the most recent. I had a great time with Funny Story, but I will say of all of them, I don't know if it's my least favorite. So I find that kind of interesting. I'm trying to think so it's Happy Place, People We Meet on Vacation, or the weird title you have, You and Me on Vacation, Book Lovers, Beach Read, and this one. I do think Funny Story is probably my least favorite, but I still really enjoyed it. And I love a good ridiculous premise, and this one kind of has it, which it felt very rom-com-ish, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
Also, I lived in Richmond, Virginia for a few years, so the fact that the book starts in Richmond, I was like, oh, okay. I was like, this is a real place, but then they end up, of course, moving to this fictional town in Michigan. I thought because the first two books of hers I read were Funny Story and Beach Read, I was like, oh, she must set all of her books in Michigan because she's from the Midwest. But then I realized that she actually does have different settings for her books the more that I read. But baseline premise for this book is that Daphne and her fiance Peter have been together for a few years. They move back to his hometown in Michigan, and Peter has decided that he is in love with his childhood best friend Petra, and they leave for each other, and Daphne ends up moving in with Petra's ex-boyfriend Miles because she has no place to live. So this is a very rom-com type situational setup. I also will say that I came very, very close to naming my daughter Petra, was very close and was very happy after I read this. And I was like, glad I didn't. So that was a fun little unnecessary tidbit for this conversation.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I before we get into it properly, I just need to get it off my chest and just have a bit of a mini rant.
Go for it.
How horrible is Peter?
Terrible.
It's not just the breaking off the engagement because you've decided you're in love with your platonic best friend.
Yeah.
He comes home from his bachelor party in the middle of the night, and he's like, yeah, so I'm actually in love with Petra. She's waiting outside. I am leaving right now for a couple of days, so you can pack up your stuff
Move out. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yep. Once again, Emily Henry just being super relatable to real life. I had an ex that texted me from his bachelor party, and I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And here I was reading this book, and I was like, it's like she knows me.
Oh my
Oh my
God.
God. I
What,
know.
like,
It's terrible. It's so terrible. And okay. Emily,
like, how are people
Daphne,
like that out there?
I
Anyway.
know there are people like this in the world. They exist. Daphne is probably for me the most problematic of the female characters that Emily Henry has
Interesting.
written.
Interesting.
Yes. And it's not that there's anything like overtly wrong with her. I just find her at times almost a bit too restrained and a bit too passive. And I found that the way that she handled everything with Peter was way too docile, like way too docile. But it made it kind of interesting because Miles is so passive that I was like, what is happening here? Like, why are both of you so nice? And that for me was kind of where I was struggling a little bit, in the sense that I was like, okay, you have two relationships where both people have been slighted out of nowhere, and both of them are taking this much better than they reasonably should be. And with Miles, I kind of got it because that really was his character. Like, and that was the backstory for Miles, right? Is that he came from a really oppressive upbringing where he had to feign being okay all of the time, and that just became his default stance. So for Miles, it really made sense why, once you got to know the character, I was like, okay, I get it here. Daphne, I was just like, why are you tolerating even speaking to this person? Like, I do not understand this. I just don't. What did you think
Mm-hmm.
about Daphne?
That's a good point, actually, because like I could really relate to Daphne.
Okay.
One of the ones I can relate to the most, although I'm not sure who I relate to the most, but I could relate to her definitely. And I didn't necessarily what am I trying to say? It didn't like bother me as I was reading that she wasn't more actively angry.
Mm-hmm.
Although now that you're saying it, I'm like, yeah, she should have like smashed up his car or something. But I could relate to this kind of subdued reaction of like, well, I guess I'll just like run away then.
Right.
Um which was kind of sad and made
Yeah.
me angrier at Peter. I think I was
Yes.
just so angry at Peter that I didn't really consider like wanting to like slap Daphne awake. So
Sure.
I was just concentrating all of my anger at Peter. Also,
Yeah.
like Petra somehow does it even worse. She leaves him a note. Like, are you joking?
Oh my God. Yeah. So
Anyway,
okay.
sidetracked. But I
It's
do
really
agree with
not
you.
though. It's not. But
I
I feel, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I do agree with you that it makes more sense for Miles to react that way, or at least we
Yeah.
get more of a tangible reason for Miles to react that
Yeah.
way. Like, yeah, fair enough. He is the one that doesn't cause problems for anybody else. So he's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm just gonna continue with my life.
Yes.
So I do agree with you on that. But I just don't think I thought about it that much with Daphne. I guess I saw her more she has more of a denial reaction than an anger one, where
Okay.
she's just like, well, pushing it away or just thinking about like running away or whatever. Like that's just I guess how I was reading it.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't bother me that she wasn't angrier, but I did find it extremely satisfying when he comes crawling back and she's just like, I'm over it, dude.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I hear you. So I feel like when I read it initially, it didn't bother me as much. And I think that's partially because it was her only book that I had read. And
yeah.
this isn't to give away any spoilers or anything like that for you. because you know that Happy Place is a second chance romance, but seeing how she can write heartbreak and
Mm-hmm.
how people can be affected by heartbreak in Happy Place made me angry that Daphne didn't experience any of that.
Right.
Um, and I think that's, I don't know if it's because we had it was 6 weeks, right? Like it was 6 weeks after that's when it starts basically.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
So
that long.
that's not that long after you've been with someone for several years, you're planning on getting married, and they blow up your life. It just felt like it was kind of too passive in that way for me, where I was like,
Mm.
I know that life goes on and you have to, live and go to work and do all the things that you have to do. But I just felt like I needed that extra oomph from Daphne, especially as a foil to Miles. But I
Mm.
really loved the interactions between Daphne and Miles. I thought that was great. And in terms of sexual tension writing, like it's top notch in this book
Oh,
because
good.
you know that those two have phenomenal chemistry, and you're like, when's this happening?
Yeah.
Like, when are we getting to this? And I really liked the idea of how certain things came about. And I loved the scene where they go to that lavender store and they run into Peter, and then they start like making out up on Miles's car. I was like, I'm here for this. I am here for this. First of all, because it's vindictive AF and I love it. And second of all,
Yeah.
finally.
Yeah. Yeah, I did love that. I just came up with a better answer about like how I felt about Daphne's reaction.
Mhm.
Because I think with and maybe I think it's still a valid criticism that it's too similar to Miles' reaction. And maybe it would have been interesting to see them like be more contrasted and maybe like her being frustrated at his reaction,
Yeah.
lack of reaction or whatever. But when we meet her dad, which to be honest, like that was probably my favorite part of the book. Like her like
Starfire is so
dealing with
great.
that. Oh, she's so funny.
Yeah.
And like her dealing with her father being flaky and
Yeah.
just not reliable at all. And I loved it because her father is clearly a terrible father, but not a horrible person. Like he's
Yeah.
not like bad in every way. He just isn't reliable.
Yeah.
And like he'll arrive and he's a bit selfish and then he just leaves. Um and I think because of that, like Daphne certainly has like some kind of abandonment issue.
Oh, definitely.
So like Peter runs away, and I think a part of her just expected that to happen.
Right.
Obviously not in a literal way, but it
Yeah.
happens, and maybe there's a part of her that's just like, yeah, there we go, fair
Par for the
enough.
course. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I
yeah.
get that completely. I think that makes quite a bit of sense. It's interesting too, right? Because when she does have that moment at the end of the book where she confronts him, her father, um, I think we've all encountered someone at some point in their life that they have behaviors that they probably don't recognize in themselves because someone just simply hasn't told them.
Mm,
And that's very much what it felt like with her father, in the sense that, he remembers to call to wish her luck with the event, but doesn't feel like he needs to physically stick around because no one's relayed that basic importance to him, and it's like some people just lack that common sense, and you kind of need
yeah,
to nudge them and be like, no, you need to be here, do this. And in the epilogue, I think she reflects over the fact that they've had a couple of visits with her father, that he's called ahead, he has scheduled, he's stayed, like it's improved because she has found her voice. And I feel
mm-hmm,
like that is something that both Daphne and Miles did really struggle with in this book, the fact that neither one of them felt very comfortable asserting themselves
yeah,
and showing their true emotions, right? Like Miles, we know there's this contextualized history over the fact that he felt he just couldn't do that in order to maintain peace. And I feel like Daphne probably was never put into a position where she could do that because she was moved around so often by her mother. And then with your parents, it's such an odd position to be in where you as the child feel like you are the parent.
Yeah.
And you don't really know how to recover from that. So I agree very much in the notion that Daphne probably just accepted this as the next form of abandonment and was kind of just waiting in some way, shape. But it's also really interesting because I wonder now too, just comparing it to other stories of Henry's, and that if she doesn't have that type of reaction because she knows deep down that Peter really isn't the person she was meant to be with. Like, it's kind of highlighted in the beginning of the book that they're very different people. She is quiet, reserved. You know, she's our stereotypical librarian, which like Peter points out regularly on behalf of how she dresses and her behavior and mannerisms. And Peter is very boisterous. He is in many ways like, he's that white privileged kid that I think of, you know, like that's Peter. And it just felt like the dichotomy between them from the very beginning was insurmountable because they just really didn't have a middle that felt manageable. And in some of her other stories, you can see what being without that one person really does to you. And I never felt that with Daphne in regards to Peter. So I feel like maybe it's because Daphne she has that knowledge of like, oh, we were so different. And in many ways, he is better suited to Petra. Like, he really is better suited to Petra, even though they both suck.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because there is really no reason for them to have worked. Like, Peter was certainly in his mind settling, even if he wasn't fully consciously doing that.
Yes.
For him, it was like comfortable and easy. And that's because she was adapting to him completely, right? And he was dictating everything about their lives. For her, it probably felt like secure, and like her mother moved her around a lot. And here she is like moving into this like town where they're not going to move away from there, like a house and like whatever. That makes sense. But emotionally, it probably like, it eventually wouldn't have worked even if there wasn't a Petra. And even when Peter comes crawling back to her, which I was very satisfying. I was just like, oh, fuck you, Peter. Like, seriously. But it kind of made sense again, because like, you're like, oh, you can't be alone. You can't handle being by yourself. So you're just going back to the next best thing. Which was just so infuriating. But so like, it makes sense, but you're right. There's not really a heartbreak coming from her not having Peter. It's a heartbreak from the situation, right? That, and like him hurting her and like abandoning her, rather than like him not being in her life as a person. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, just the way that she tackles relationships as a whole in this story, because Daphne is a very isolated person, right? She moves to this town for Peter. She doesn't know anyone there external of Peter's friends, Peter's family. And even though she's worked at her job for basically a year, she really hasn't made any of an effort to get to know her coworkers because her whole life revolved around Peter. And when she does start to form that relationship with her coworker, I loved this because forming relationships and friendships as an adult is really difficult. Like, it's so difficult. And I feel like it's something that really isn't discussed very often, where people are like, oh yeah, I talk to my friends, and those are the same friends that you've either had from high school or college. I feel like for most people, college is the cutoff of when you're like, this is the last time I made friends and I'm not doing it ever again. It's these people until I die. And that's pretty much it. And I mean, if you're lucky, you might have the odd friend if you work in an office, or, you know, you work in a communal space with other people. But the world that we live in now, that's become much more infrequent, with people working remotely and from home. And like, my husband works with people, we live in Maryland, in Minnesota, you know, like he's never going to meet them. So it's just one of those things that's your new dynamic. And this felt so relatable, where I was like, she's really struggling to connect and make friends. I was like, I get this, because like you, we have both moved to countries that are not the countries of our birth. And it is a monumental shift. And it can be really hard to not only assimilate to a new place, but then try to ingratiate yourself in the community and culture and want to embrace that when it's fundamentally different from what you're used to. And if you already have a reserved personality on top of that, which Daphne does, it's inherently uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable. See, Evie says, workplace friends are just workplace. All the friends I made at work, as soon as they left, the friendship quickly disintegrated. And that's exactly it. A lot of people, it never goes beyond surface level stuff. Like I know the odd person that has become very close with a friend at work. Like my mom's best friend was her former coworker. They worked together for like 30 years though. So I mean, like they really had time to get to know each other. But it's just that. It's very surface level for many, many people. And I think what is relatable in this scenario is that both of them have gone through this monumental life shift, and that's what brings them together and connects them, right? And it's like in certain phases of life where you can't connect with people until you have shared a similar experience. Like you can have friends that are parents, but you don't really understand what they're experiencing until you yourself become a parent. Or, you know, like if you get divorced and your friends are divorced, like it's very much that you gravitate towards people that share similar experiences to you. And I really appreciated this aspect of the book because it felt so real.
Definitely. Yeah. It's something that has always been in the background of like my existence. Like, so my parents are from two different countries, are like German and Spanish. So when I was growing up, there was always one of them or both of them that were not in their home country. So that was always like creates a dynamic that is challenging sometimes or just different. And then I moved, I was in school in Spain. I moved to Germany for college and I made friends like that. I was worried about making friends. So easy in college. I mean, you get there, there's tons of people that aren't from there. Everybody wants to make friends. Everybody wants to go drinking. And it's easy. And then when I moved to Ireland after college, I was a little bit less worried, thinking, well, you've done it before, you can do it again.
Do it again.
Completely different. Like what you just described. Like it takes so much longer, and just it takes a bit of luck of like getting into the right environment. And then like having people that aren't just acquaintances, which is cool because every once in a while you just want to get a drink after work, and that's fine. But after a while, you want like the genuine connection of like, I have a friend who I talk to about like real stuff, and like I can go get a coffee, and like I don't have to text them on WhatsApp and see them like 3 times a year. So yeah, that was so relatable. And the fact that she wants a place for herself, and this doesn't feel like a place for her or her place anymore because it was always Peter's place. But then because her mother has moved around so much, she doesn't have like one place to return to either. Like her friend is somewhere else, her mother is somewhere else. So like she feels adrift. Very relatable.
100%. Like it's funny because my mom came down to visit a month and a half ago, and she asked me, she's like, what is it like living in the States? Hello. And she said, do you feel like you're an American now? And I said, absolutely not. Like, I do not feel like I will ever feel like I am an American ever. And, but then I simultaneously said, but I don't necessarily feel Canadian anymore. You know, like I've been removed from my country for, 7 years, and you kind of have to adapt in some ways to where you are. Otherwise, you're just going to be miserable and lamenting where you've been. And it's a really big identity shift. And one of the things that I feel like people don't necessarily discuss often in the US is that America is so different from state to state. Like every state really has its own identity, its own feel, its own personality. And Richmond is where like the southern part of America really begins. Like it is the heart of the Confederacy, but there is a young community there because there's college there. It's such a weird place to live. And I say this from personal experience. Like it is a really weird place to live. And going to Michigan, which is like the polar opposite of that spectrum, is so vastly whiplash for someone. And for a kid that has moved all around and hasn't really been able to accumulate an identity for themselves and then just kind of keeps getting thrusted into these new places, I could see that being really, really confronting. And I feel like Daphne is just so relatable on so many of these aspects. And I don't know if that's kind of what builds into her being this really indecisive person because of the fact that her life was constantly in flux and she really couldn't latch on to an identity, a community, a person other than her mom. It just, it fuels that whole conversation in regards to Daphne. Hello, Christine.
Definitely.
Happy to have you here. And yes, it seems like the general consensus is, yeah, Texas versus Kentucky versus Tennessee. Like none of them are like the other. And you can have different cities within the same state that are nothing like the other place. Like if you look at, if you want to talk about for a second book lovers, right? Asheville is very liberal in a very conservative state. It's very interesting within America as a whole in terms of identity and things like that. So yeah, I mean, even Florida, completely different within the state. Yeah, exactly. North versus South Florida. Like there's just so many different identities in terms of culture. And I really loved seeing even within the same place, the dichotomy of culture, because you have Peter, who comes from a lot of money, wealth, prestige, privilege, and you have Miles, who, even though he's not from Michigan, he's from Illinois, but he feels like he's from Michigan because he appreciates the area so much. But you get to see it through his eyes and sort of through Peter's, which I thought was really interesting. And I loved that.
I really loved that Miles isn't from there either. I thought that added a very interesting undertone to it because he has chosen this place. So by being with Miles, she's not choosing the place because of Miles, she's choosing the place and Miles, which is a very important difference to how it was with Peter. And also often I find that I'm going to make a really weird comparison here, but you know, there's like a little weird subgenre of like crime fiction that I think of as atmospheric crime. Where like there's a very distinct sense of place. Like there's a wave of like outback noir, like Australian crime. There's like Scottish crime. And it's very distinct place. And often you would think that the authors are always from that place. And it's actually a pretty 50-50 shot. More often than not, the author lives in that place but isn't originally from there. And I think that makes a lot of sense because if you come from somewhere else, you will see it with fresh eyes and you might see what its little like
gems are.
Exactly. Because anybody who's from there will just see that as normal, but you're arriving and you're saying like, oh, this is different. Oh, this is unique to here. Whereas somebody who has always been there will just be like, oh, really? Like, you know? So I love that we get Miles showing her around because he has taken the time to get to know the place and the places are special to him. Whereas Peter is just like, yeah, whatever. It's the town.
Exactly. Yeah, you can see the beauty and nuance of a place when you are outside of it, 100%. And it's funny to me because so we now live in Maryland, and because I couldn't wait to get out of Virginia. Like, I was counting down seconds to get out of there. And my best friends have lived here their whole lives, but I would come to visit them for the last like 13, 15 years. And every time I came here, I was like, this is just the most beautiful place. And they were like, it's all right. You know, and I was like, you guys don't see it. Like, you don't see it. It's beautiful. And I still, like, anytime I get in my car, I say to my husband, I'm like, oh, like, how gorgeous is this place? You know, it's so, so pretty. And people that have grown up here don't really view it the same way. Like, they can appreciate something, but it might not be the same for anybody else. Or sometimes, you know, you have the opposite effect of when you leave a place, you look back on it maybe more fondly than it previously was, and you see all the little things that Daphne was not a military brat. It was just that her mother moved them around frequently. It's Happy Place, Evie, and you should read Happy Place because it's so good. But you can also read Funny Story.
Both.
Both are great. But yeah, so speaking of the touring around with Miles, this was something I really, really enjoyed. As someone who cooks and bakes regularly, I loved that he highlighted like basic ingredients. I loved this so much.
I loved that Miles, again, as a contrast to Peter, is looked down on by Peter for his profession, or what Peter perceives to be his
as
profession.
no
He's not
profession.
even sure. Yeah. And like, not just that he's like, yeah, I haven't figured things out yet or whatever. And he's like, no, I do this for real, actually, and I really love it, and I'm really good at it, and I care, and I love that. Like, just, you know, a different kind of person. I think this is maybe a preconceived notion I had about romance as well, but I do think it's a thing, or like a trope of like, oh, the billionaire or whatever, which is not something I'm interested in at all.
That's fair. That is legitimately fair.
Billionaire, red flag. But I really liked that bit of dynamic as well, and it's like you said about like the ingredients and where to buy them, and like that it does make a difference. And it just feels like when she is deciding what kind of person a character is, she really gives it thought. And I don't know if she would do like research specifically, but like she would really sit there and be like, okay, so a person who cares about this, how would that manifest? What small things would they care about in relation with this? Like, how would they talk about it? And it really shines, and it makes it, I love when people are passionate about things, even if it's not the same thing I'm passionate about. And that really shines in her characters. That was really cool. And I loved like they're passionate about different things. But they enjoy engaging with the other's interest.
Yes. I completely agree. And I really loved Miles. Like, I really, really liked Miles because of that fact. He is so willing to share that with pretty much anyone he encounters. And I completely agree. Like, this goes back to just Peter being the absolute worst, but him saying, you know, that Miles doesn't have a job and like his family doesn't speak to them, has zero context on anything. And I also love the fact that Miles calls out Daphne. He's like, did you not know I worked at this winery for like the last 4 years? And she was like, no. So I super appreciated that. I thought it was hilarious. I was like, yeah, girl, get your facts together. Like, come on, stop listening to stupid Peter. But I really loved the beginning of the book's dynamic where the two of them are like slowly starting to get to know each other in the apartment. And it's the fact that Miles is so disorganized and his room is so chaotic, and he's listening to emotional music, which I thought was so great. And Daphne is basically the complete antithesis to this, where she's very put together, she's very reformed, and keeps everything to herself, whereas Miles is much more a free spirit, it feels like, which was very much like Peter and Petra, in that Petra seemed to be all over the place, whereas Peter was very conformist. This is how things are done. And I really loved watching how two people who at the beginning seem quite opposite to each other, you realize have more in common with each other and come into sync with each other. And how they can learn from one another. I thought that was well executed in the story.
For sure. Yeah. I really enjoyed everything set in the apartment, to be honest. I thought it was a great setting because of how she describes it and the dynamic that you were saying.
Yes.
And then we start adding people into that dynamic. And I got such a New Girl feel from it.
He is so Nick.
He's so Nick. And I loved it. I was like, yes, this is Nick Miller.
Yeah, it's Nick Miller. 100%. 100%. Oh my gosh, too. And his sister, I loved his sister so much, whose name is escaping me off the top of my head right now.
Julia?
What was it? Julia. Yes, it was Julia. Also because having siblings with a big age gap is always so fascinating, just because I think what their experience was very accurate. Like my mom and her sister are 6, almost 7 years apart. And they didn't really know each other much as kids, because by the time that my mom was a teenager, my aunt had moved out, and you don't have that time to really formulate that relationship and get to know one another. So you really are having to get to know each other as adults. And the younger sibling, I think, can sometimes know and see things better than the older sibling, because they're able to view it from the lens of like, this is what it was like when you were here, and this is what it was like when you weren't here. And just in terms of mental abuse from parents to children, and seeing how that affects like two different children, how they can manifest it differently when they come from the same upbringing, the same people, the same genetics, I always think is so fascinating, just to see how different personalities can emerge from the same environment. And of the two of them, while Miles is much more grounded, I feel like Julia is much more emotionally stable than Miles, because she's able to, she's able to acknowledge the fact that it is okay to not be okay. And it takes Miles most of the book to realize that.
Yeah. And I think, it could have been swapped and that would have been believable as well.
Yep.
But I feel like the fact that he is the older sibling and a man, and she is like of a younger generation, where I feel like the younger the person, the more ingrained the like talk of mental health is, that it makes so much sense that the like younger sibling, who is also female, is the one that is like mentally like more well adjusted, even if she's like expressing it in a more chaotic way, whereas he's like, seems fine, is not fine.
Not gonna touch it, looks okay, so we're just gonna leave that alone and compartmentalize it forever. 100%. Oh my gosh, so favorite moments for me from this book were all the stuff in the apartment. I really loved the lavender shop scene that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But I loved the prom FP.
Oh my God. Yes.
So funny. Like I loved that so much. And just whenever there was an exchange of banter between Peter and Miles, or putting them in the same environment, I was like, yes, I am frothing for this. It is great. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think this one, out of all of her books, bar Happy Place, which I haven't read, really played up the comedy side of the rom-com with like a lot of situational comedy, and like highlighted with like, how many people can we pile into this tiny apartment?
Oh yeah.
I really loved is it Starlight? It was Starlight, right? As was the Starfire.
Yeah.
I really liked her character, because he shows up with like this new woman and he's like, oh, I got married, and you expect her to be a certain way, especially by how she's described, but she's actually a nice person. She seems like a nice person, and it seems like he genuinely cares. Like by the end of it, I'm not like left with this feeling that her father has completely changed and is going to do everything perfectly. Absolutely not. But I'm left with the feeling that he might, or that he's trying, and that he genuinely, like, the marriage between him and Starfire might actually work, which is bizarre.
But but it could, and that's the thing. Like, I feel like Emily Henry in general, and this could be a rom-com trope, where our first impression of people is always almost often put into question, but in this book especially, because she has a very set idea of her impression of Miles. And she kind of has to roll that back and be like, oh no, he's not those things. And I think as the reader, we then have that with Starfire too, where we're like, oh, who's this? And then we're like, oh no, she's genuinely a caring and good person out there. But she
Making
seems
choices.
like, she seems that she genuinely means well and is, caring and sweet. So she could be a very good help to Daphne's father. So yeah, honestly, I think that Emily Henry just does such a beautiful job at pulling you into the setting. I think that the settings in all of her books are very atmospheric. You feel like you know the characters, you know the settings very well. And a lot of the time, I think that the settings influence a lot of the personalities of the characters. I'd say specifically more so for book lovers, because I think Nora's New York personality is her personality a lot of the time. Not that that's a bad thing. I think it's great. And I just think she does such a good job at making people feel rooted where they are geographically. And I love that in all of her books. I really appreciated that in this book specifically because it was a character getting to know their new surroundings. And I felt like we were getting to experience it through Daphne's eyes. And Miles was our fun tour guide, taking us to all of these cool places. So it's something else I really appreciate is that I think a lot of the time I was thinking romance is probably just going to either take place in like New York or it's going to be on like a tropical island somewhere. Like there's zero in between.
Or like a Western Christmas thing.
Yes. Like a Western Christmas novel thing. And I was like, it sounds horrendous. I will never read that ever. Like I started reading, I sent you yesterday a picture of a description and a book cover because I did so much research yesterday as to authors that people recommend that are similar to Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez. And people are like, oh, you need to look at this one. And I looked at it and I was like, this sounds 100% the opposite of what I just read. So I'm not sure if you guys got the prompt, but this was not it. So, oh, man.
One that I started, it just reminded me of it because of the one bed trope, which I just like, I mean, but I started the, what is it called? The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas, which is like, I think it's technically a second one, but it's one of those where like, oh, the best friend is the main character in the second one. You don't have to like read them in order.
Yep.
And I got about, I want to say like 50 pages in, maybe.
Yeah.
And I was like, nope, not doing this. This is stupid. But like the premise was basically like the main character's apartment has an issue with her apartment. So she has a spare key for her best friend's apartment and her best friend is on her honeymoon. So she's like, I'll just go stay there for the night. So she goes to her best friend's apartment. And as she's there, somebody arrives and it's her best friend's cousin who is actually over I think they're in New York for like a couple of weeks, and he's staying in the and she didn't know. So like now they're both in the apartment, and obviously it's a studio and there's one bed, which like okay, fine, but like there is zero, like there's immediate like infatuation, for no reason. Like he's just like she's also like apparently been stalking him for like a year and weird, but they've never met.
Right.
So immediate infatuation, and then there's one bed on both sides because we get both perspectives. So I was like, why is this a 400-page book? Like you're attracted to each other, you're in an apartment by yourself, like
get it together.
Get it together. Like there's absolutely no reason for this not to be resolved in 50 pages.
I completely agree. And this is something that I feel Emily Henry does really well, and Abby Jimenez also does very, very well. So I'm excited for you to read her, and that it's the building of the relationship, right? Like it's a very character-driven story. And, we talk so much because in our little corner of BookTube, we mostly talk about fantasy, and it is a lot of the time, like we talk about Abercrombie and Robin Hobb, like doing really great character work. And we couldn't possibly imagine that a romance author would be doing similar character work, And in reality, I think that Emily Henry does phenomenal character work. And I think
Yeah.
that Abby Jimenez also does very excellent character work in that we are getting to know the foundations of a character. We are learning why they do the things that they do, what makes them tick. Is this a quirk that they have developed as an adult? Is this something that they developed in childhood? Is it trauma based? Is it reactionary based? Like, that is a lot of effort to put into a one-off novel.
Yeah.
And you feel like you fully know a character at the end of Emily Henry's books. And they are not long books. And they are a singular novel. And I feel like at the end of it, I'm like, I completely understood motivations for this character. I feel like I know their backstory. I know them, and I have a very clear idea of where they're going. And
Yeah.
I think that that takes monumental work as an author. And I think we are not giving them the props that they deserve for that.
Absolutely agreed. And like she does it in a way that makes it seem natural and effortless.
Yes.
And
Yes.
she draws all of the conflict comes from a place of character. It either comes from whatever their trauma response is and
Yep.
like that clashing with each other, or creating miscommunication, but the miscommunication comes from a believable place of like, this is
Yes.
how I handle situations, or it's an external conflict that then makes them behave in certain ways, again,
Yep.
based on like who they are as people and what we've established. And that
Yep.
takes so much skill. I can completely agree. Like, so undervalued. Like, we just take that for granted because it's romance and it's for girls.
Yeah, that's exactly it. As soon as it's classified as for women, it's less than. It's less than. So yeah, which
not
is
deep at all.
It's not deep. It's not meaningful. It's smut. Like, in terms of romantasy, it's not real fantasy. It's romance. It's bullshit, is what it is. It's absolute bullshit. And I think Emily Henry is fantastic, and I'm super excited that we will talk more about her. Second episode.
Whenever we're free to to do the next two. Did we say?
I think
do you want to do the next three next? Actually, since you've read them, I'll just read Happy Place.
I mean, I'm super excited for you to read Happy Place. I'm fine if you want to do the next three. I think that would be kind of interesting just in terms of doing a comparison, because each of those three we have for book lovers, it is like enemies to lovers type thing. Very vaguely, but like not super in depth, but I think that's probably what it'd be classified under. And then people we meet on vacation, or you and me on vacation, is friends to lovers, and then Happy Place is a second chance romance. So they're all different, but they all have similar themes. So I think that that could be interesting to compare and contrast all three. And then maybe we can do A.B. Jimenez after we do our Emily Henry reads. But it seems like you've got a buddy read now. I would reread it again, even though I just read it. Like, I'm not kidding, guys. It's probably going to be one of my top 5 books of the year. Like, I was messaging Yolanda as I was reading it. I was like, I've cried twice. I've now cried 3 times. I've cried 5 times.
That is amazing. I absolutely like.
I don't read and cry. Like, I don't read and cry. But Emily Henry kills me.
I am so excited to read it now. Book Lovers was one of my top 10 books of the year last year, and I think so far Funny Story would be up there this year. So we'll see if it's Happy Place instead. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, you reminded me when you were listing the tropes. Something that I thought was fun about the concept of this one is that, in a way, so like, I have issues with friends to lovers. It can work, but it's not my favorite, because I'm always left with like, but what about the people you've dated throughout this entire time that you've been like kind of secretly in love and not acknowledging it, and like it's a bit iffy and like whatever. So I really like that in Funny Story we have a bit of a flip of that, where Peter and Petra are getting their friends to lovers moment. But we're not concerned with that. It doesn't work. Yeah. And we're concerned with the people that are left. And I thought that was a really cool reversal of that trope.
That's true. I never really thought about it in that way. That's true. I think I'm a little bit more partial to friends to lovers, because that literally is my scenario of how I got married. In that I was friends with my husband for 4 years before we started dating. So it's not like we were, you know, childhood best friends that knew each other like our whole lives type thing. But so I like that type of scenario where I'm like, oh yeah. But like I also view it too as, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about people we meet on vacation, where I feel like every relationship you have builds you as a person. Like you take and you learn something from each relationship, be it a positive or a negative of like, oh, I want this with my next partner, or I want this. And I like that that's kind of what happens in people we meet on vacation, but then simultaneously, like there's a lot more going on in that story, but I still loved it. Second Chance Romance is my favorite. Oh, you're gonna friggin' love Happy Place. Like, I'm so excited for you to read this, Evie, because it's so good. But yes, we can do all 3 books next time and unfortunately wrap up Emily Henry, because like I just want her to have 70 more books for me to jump into and read.
Yeah.
I'm hoping she'll have another book out next year that I can immediately buy and inhale. But I'm hoping you and I will start our little romance book club here. And
I'm all for it. I'm so excited.
Too.
We should just like, once we finish Emily Henry, just like pick an author a month
Abby
or
Jimenez.
whenever.
We'll go into Abby Jimenez because
we'll do that next.
I think you'll like her style of storytelling. It's very similar to Emily Henry, except I feel that Jimenez tries to tackle a bit more of complicated things like abuse and stuff like that. So I'll be interested when we get to that part. But this was so fun. I'm so excited that you started reading romance so I could start reading romance. So thank you, Yolanda. Hello, Carlos. And
the other half of story too.
Yes, the other half of story too. And maybe after that we'll get you into Romantasy and ACOTAR, and we can talk about ACOTAR, and that'll be the next evolution of our romance book club.
Yeah, and then we can like circle like right back, and like next year we can talk about Fourth Wing when the next one comes out.
Oh my gosh, I already pre-ordered it, Yolanda. I pre-ordered that sucker. It's happening. I'm so excited. It's been a really great year for Yolanda and I, everybody. We've discovered these new things about ourselves that are just working, and it's been great. So Thank you for joining us. This was super, super fun. If you want to tell us in the comments below which of the 2 books we talked about is your favorite, what was your first Emily Henry read, all of that, please let us know. If you are not following Yolanda, please go follow her. She is the other half of StoryTube. You saw the other half a second ago. Together, they are fully StoryTube, and they are delightful. Any final words or anything you would like to say?
I think Funny Story is my second or third favorite. I haven't quite settled on it. And between actually Beach Read and Funny Story for number 2 and 3, I'm not entirely certain which one comes first. I have to stay a bit on Funny Story maybe. But yeah, this was super fun. This was really, really fun. I'm so excited to turn our Emily Henry book club into a romance book club.
Me too. I'm super excited. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.